Hello and welcome to this afternoon's launch of the Road Ahead 2023. I'm Nick, the Networks Manager here at NCVO, and I'm delighted to be joining you as we present what we anticipate will be the biggest trends, opportunities and events that will impact charities and volunteering in the year ahead. Looking back on 2022, and it's been an eventful 12 months. We've had 3 prime ministers, we've witnessed the biggest war in Europe since World War II, and we're in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. But what do we, NCVO, think the next 12 months will look like, and how should charities and volunteers prepare? In just a moment, I'll be handing over to my colleague to guide us through this year's Road Ahead. But before we get stuck into the content, let's cover the all-important housekeeping slide. So closed captions have been enabled for today's event, and you can turn these on or off by clicking on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. To help with accessibility, the slides for today's events have just been shared in the chat as a PDF. If it would help, you can download these to your computer and zoom in and out of the slides as we go along. If you've joined us via a phone or a tablet and you can't download the slides and it would be beneficial to have them, do email ncvoevents@ncvo.org.uk and we can send these over to you straight away. Everyone's joined today in view-only mode, which means that your cameras and your microphones are automatically turned off, so you can sit back and relax. And as today's session is being recorded, but you're in view-only mode, you won't appear on screen. Please do share your own views and your reflections on the things that you hear today in the chat. And if anyone is tweeting as we go along, please use the hashtag #RoadAhead and tag NCVO in your tweets. Finally, for any questions that you have about the road ahead, please click on the Q&A button in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen and submit your questions to us there. So to look at the agenda, in just a moment, I'll be handing over to Alex Farrow, NCVO's Director of Influence and Engagement, who will provide an overview of our predictions of this year's Road Ahead. We'll then welcome 2 guest speakers who will offer their own reflections of what we hear today. So joining us will be Charlotte Hill, the CEO of the Felix project, and Zoe Amar, the founder of social enterprise and digital agency Zoe Amar Digital. Towards the end of the event, we'll have the opportunity for a Q&A session with Alex, Charlotte and Zoe, who will be joined by 2 colleagues from our policy team, Sam Mercadante and Chris Walker. Again, any kind of questions that you want to put to any of our speakers today, you can submit those questions via the Q&A function. But let's get started. To give us an overview of the Road Ahead 2023, I'm pleased to now hand over to Alex.
Thanks so much, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. As Nick said, my name is Alex Farrow. I'm Director of Influencing and Engagement here at NCVO, and it's a pleasure to be launching our Road Ahead 2023. So for those of you who might not know, the Road Ahead is our kind of annual foresight publication where we at NCVO look at what we think are going to be some of the biggest trends that are going to impact but might also be opportunities for charities and for volunteering over the next kind of 12 months. And this year, we're producing a slightly different version of the Road Ahead than we have before, a kind of more concise and a lighter version. Honestly, we had to refocus some of our work in September to make sure we had the kind of time and capacity to support lots of work on energy and cost of living. And so this year's publication is a shorter publication than usual, but that full publication will be coming back next year in 2024. So this year, we have 5 blogs focusing on some of the key themes that we think will affect charities this year. And alongside this is a list of dates for your diary to help you keep track of the many events and opportunities that happen, well, on a week-by-week basis, but kind of broadly over the next 12 months. For all of our kind of thinking, we draw on a range of different sources. So some of what we talk about in the Road Ahead is kind of official statistics and research and forecasts, but a lot of it also is drawn from the experiences that we hear from members and from partners all the time, and of course the expertise of the colleagues and partners that we have who are supporting organizations kind of day in, day out. Also particularly want to say thank you very much to our partners in the civil society group who both fed into their thinking about the kind of big things happening this year, but also the calendar of events. Worth noting, this is of course just a starting point. So this is kind of general trends and drivers for all charities, so it is general by nature, and of course is a kind of launch pad for your own thinking about how this will impact your particular charity and your subsector. That's kind of for you to then do that thinking. Hopefully this is a good starting point for that. Just a final thing before I talk about the 5 themes and look at them in turn. The team, our team here at NCVO, but also our partner organisations have done an incredible job in producing this publication. So at the very top of this, I just want to say thank you to all of those who've been involved. But I want particularly to pay thanks to Tom Burke, one of our associates who coordinated this piece of work and led on drafting the insight pieces and the calendar that we're publishing today. So let's start the deep dive into some of the themes that we've identified for this year. So 5 themes on the screen that you see there. It is a very difficult and challenging time at the moment. And it feels like we are going from one crisis to another. What's kind of began perhaps with the pandemic has led into an energy crisis, into an economic crisis, political instability that we have all been aware of that Nick kind of talked about at the beginning, as well as the big systemic crises that have been long-standing around climate change or kind of inequality. And so from that, it is almost difficult to identify key things that we think should be front and center of people's minds, but we've done our best. And these are the 5 that we are presenting to the sector today. So 2023 will be a year where that cost of living crisis really endures. And whilst there is some kind of light on the horizon, some positive signs, inflation is reducing, fuel costs are coming down, the reality is that for communities and charities across the country, this is going to be a tough year ahead. We know that staff and trustees and volunteers are also feeling not just the impact of that cost of living crisis, but also the fatigue that has worn us down from years of being kind of going from crisis to crisis, but also reimagining and reinventing our organizations in some cases to match the needs of the communities that we're here to serve. And whilst many of us we are surrounded by people who relentlessly keep on going, we need to make sure that we're treating our staff, our trustees and our volunteers with care and placing their well-being kind of front and center as well. Now, not everyone will be impacted by many of the things we're talking about in the same way. And there are indeed particular risks that when we talk about a cost of living crisis and an economic crisis, it not only entrenches, but also exacerbates the existing inequalities that exist in our society. And so action on equity cannot and mustn't be kind of put to one side, but rather it must be absolutely core for how we do, firstly, the 2 top things I've just mentioned there, the first 1 and 2, around cost of living and energy, but also supporting our staff and our volunteers. The levers of political change that we can pull are changing. A general election is on the horizon. Politicians of all political parties are starting to look for ideas about what should be in future manifestos. We also have a government in place that has a kind of finite time on the horizon. It has a fixed period where it knows an election must be called. And so it slightly worries me to say that we're in a period of political stability because we very much said that in last year's Road Ahead for avid readers of our edition, and we were a little bit wrong. And so I'm optimistic this year that perhaps we have some political stability, at least with the Prime Minister and also a majority government as well. Finally, there will be, through all of this, a need to keep a pace in delivering for our causes and communities, but making sure that we're doing that in line with new laws and regulations that are coming, particularly that will impact us as charities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these themes next. I'm not going to be talking about all of the findings we've had. So whilst on the slides, there will be kind of the key things that we've highlighted in our blogs, I'm not going to talk all of those things through. But here is a kind of snapshot look, if you like, at some of the things that we are both thinking about, but also some things that we think charities should be doing and thinking in response. So let's just think a little bit more about the cost of living. And really, this is ups and downs. So the cost of running an organization is increasing, whether that is because of the cost of buying things has increased, or because we're trying to ensure staff kind of have more pay or are kind of able to weather inflation as well. And so we think that will be a significant risk for charities over the next kind of 12 months. As I said, we are starting to see some signs of inflation falling and energy prices reducing, but they remain much higher than what organizations were paying this time last year or the year before. And so while some positive signs, it is positive against quite a negative situation. We think there's going to be reduced public sector income. Particularly, we have not seen local authorities being able to uplift local authority contracts. So things around procurement, but also it is likely that there might be less money even going to local authorities in the year ahead as well. This together, we know, and your experience is telling us that too, that charities and informal community groups are seeing an increased demand for their services as cost of living hits households and forces people to use the services from charities that they may not have had to have done before. And all kind of surveys that were released at the end of last year saw a huge demand increasing, being reported by organizations. So what are some of the things that we think you should be thinking about? And of course, I say you, but of course we as NCVO, we're also thinking about these things very much ourselves too. But first of all, this is a period of time where people will be kind of checking budgets. And we do need to be realistic about our income and our expenditure and how we think that's going to pan out. Of course, we can't plan everything, but we have to do the best that we can in setting realistic budgets. Many voluntary organizations will be considering how to meet that increased demand, but also that changing demand. And it's always important in this moment to go back to our kind of governing documents and make sure that we're focusing on our charitable purpose. That means that we can adapt and flex where we're seeing changing demand, but we do need to focus on the reason why we exist very specifically. And what matters for us in a kind of social sector is the difference that we make, not necessarily the legal form that we take. And so we are needing to consider whether changing our legal structures, merging with other organizations, or closing organizations might allow us to continue delivering that purpose. And if it does come to it, ending well is a really vital and crucial part of that process as well. Thinking about supporting staff and trustees, we know that kind of staff, trustees, volunteers are in many ways the heart of voluntary organizations, but we see and we hear that the crises that we've faced in recent years are taking their toll. We know that recruitment and retention is a real challenge, and we have an economy where there are more jobs and more vacancies and higher levels of people not working. So we see that lead to competition. And so it is a kind of workers' market in some respect where they can be selective about the work that they do. And we know that there are parts of our sector that struggle with low pay. And that does make it both difficult to recruit, but also to retain, particularly when pay is growing faster in the private sector and in some parts of the public sector too. So where there's the bigger the gap we have to those other sectors, the tougher the recruitment challenge can be for our sector. Whilst we can't always compete on pay, we can compete on flexibility, something that we said in our collaborative Time to Flex reports last year. And so as flexible working becomes more common across the workforce in general, we can lead the way as a sector in not just ensuring those new rights for flexible working that are coming are kind of embedded, but actually we can go beyond them. And that Time to Flex report is such a good starting point for that. So what should you be thinking about? So first of all, check around that pay, and that's going to be difficult in a kind of cost of living crisis where incomes are falling. But in order to bring people into the sector, we're going to need to be competitive against other sectors. We're going to need to embed that flexible working, that remote working, and all the benefits that brings. But that might mean that we need to change not just our staffing structures and the way we work as organisations, but also how we work with volunteers around the country as well. And we do need to support and engage that volunteer kind of cohort as well. And our vision for volunteering sets out very clearly some of the things the big systemic things that we think need to change over the long term for volunteering, but that will kind of sit alongside many of the other big volunteering activities that are happening this year as well. These crises, as I said at the beginning of my kind of presentation, are not equally distributed across our society. And as a sector, our drive to represent the kind of diversity and reflect the communities that we serve mustn't slow down. In fact, as long as these inequalities endure in our communities, then that drive must not fade. In July 2021, research found that kind of 4 out of 5 organisations had plans to address equity, diversity and inclusion within their organisations and within the services that they provided or within the campaigns that they were running. Now, 3 years on, we need to be thinking about what action have we taken to ensure that equity, diversity and inclusion is embedded in all aspects of our kind of organisational life. So a focus here is maintaining this as an absolute priority for our organisations, whether that's in our staffing teams, our trustee boards, in how and where we provide services, between the outcomes for the people who are using the services that we use, and ensuring that is front and centre. Because we know that there are going to be big challenges, particularly around kind of culture wars that kind of people and organisations are drawn into, which kind of really can frustrate action on equity, diversity and inclusion as well. So this year, there is some new data coming. We get data from the census, and we think this is a really useful opportunity to look at the services we're designing and the activities and look at the communities that we're serving. And that's a useful set of data that we can harness to drive action. But we also need to be advocates for equity as well. So where there are missions of the government, say things like the Levelling Up missions, we can use some of these kind of levers to advocate for equity, as well as reflect and take action in our own organisations as well. So what are some of the steps we can take? Well, first of all, we should be taking stock of the progress that we've made and highlight those where change has happened, but also highlight and prioritise areas for development or where kind of inaction is prevailing. Use that data that is available to drive action in work, both external bits of data that we might get from the census, but also internal data that we have about the services that we're providing on the campaigns that we're running. And we encourage our kind of organisations to be open and transparent about the work that they are doing, something that we have tried to do also at NCVO. As I said, kind of political change has been kind of a roller coaster. Last year saw a political storm almost unlike any other. 4 chancellors, 3 prime ministers, 2 leadership elections within the Conservative Party. As I said, this is going to be a key year for political parties as a general election is anticipated in 2024, must happen no later than January 2025. And this is the year that we would expect political parties, but also all of those with an interest in influencing those parties to kind of increase the level of influencing that we're doing to influence what goes into manifestos, but also the narratives around an election. So we still, of course, this year, we're going to be engaging with the current government. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has been clear on his priorities for the year ahead, but he also has to lead a very different Conservative Party. And there are many kind of groups and factions within the Conservative Party. So even with a majority of 80 seats in the House of Commons, getting things done might not be necessarily as easy. There are also a lot of former ministers on the backbenches, and also a lot of people who will never, if current polling is to be believed, will never make the front bench. And so that does change the nature and dynamics of the Conservative Party. Parliamentary time is also going to be really tight this season. So lots of business to get done. And perhaps that might conclude in the autumn before a kind of King's speech, the final King's speech, perhaps before a general election. So our message here is, if you're trying to influence the current government, act now, because time is going to be short, but be thinking about kind of the opportunities for engaging with political parties in the next kind of 18 months, perhaps, as we head at some point towards a general election. Now, we have seen, and we are very conscious of the kind of legal restrictions that are perhaps on being heard, and kind of the shrinking of civic space that we have seen, particularly from a kind of legal perspective, whether that's around voter ID, elections, or on kind of protest. And so we will continue to be very loud and vocal where we're and our members are opposed to these new pieces of legislation, but do consider, when thinking about engaging politically, about those kind of new laws and restrictions in place. So what are some of the steps to be thinking about? First of all, engage in these debates, and with a range of political parties. A lot is up for grabs, and now is the time to influence. Always ensure kind of good governance and risk. A particular thing that we would highlight, particularly if senior leaders in charities are putting themselves forward for to be political party candidates, something that isn't a continual risk for organisations, but something to be mindful of as we head towards an election. And finally, parliamentary time will be tight, but we do expect a kind of range of legal and regulatory changes that will affect charities, both big and small. So there will be new forthcoming guidance from the Charity Commission on investments, and keep your eyes peeled in the kind of coming weeks and months as NCVO, as we launch a kind of big campaign thinking about that as well. But that guidance will come in the next few months. And there will be a number of laws that will impact also on charity. So new duties to tackle harassment, data protection laws are up for change as well. The online safety bill will come to a conclusion. And alongside this, we expect further changes on employment rights, on procurement, and new duties to risk assess venues, particularly for risks related to terrorism. There have also been some changes to reporting, particularly to the Charity Commission in terms of the annual review. And we're really pleased that kind of charities will need to provide new information to the Charity Commission every year, but we're pleased to see that has been less intense in terms of the changes than it might well have been. So what are some of the things that you can do? First of all, stay up to date, and we have a regular newsletter that goes out that can keep you up to date with all the things that are happening in terms of regulation. Plan ahead for that new annual return set of questions, but also look out for our new campaign that is coming shortly. My final thought, just before I kind of hand back to Nick, is it is easy in all the things that I've just presented and that we're presenting today to essentially be swept away by the amount of challenge. And it can feel consuming and perhaps even overwhelming when we see the urgent need for our work against all the many things that I've just talked about that kind of are challenging for not just our sector, but all of the communities we serve. And through this, it's important, I think, that we don't lose hope. First of all, the worst of predictions don't always materialize. And so sometimes things are not as bad as they might seem from this point. On campaigning, charities, groups and movements are winning. And it is worth reminding that we make advances on freedoms and rights all the time. And so that's something for us to hold on to. The public repeatedly step forward. They show willingness to help others, and in doing so reveal our best selves, whether that's how we give our time, our money, or our support and love to one another. So whatever gives you hope at the moment, cling on to it. Undoubtedly, times are hard. We are tired. We face more struggles. But from wherever you draw strength, keep that hope and share it, because hope and optimism can be infectious as well. So thank you, and I will pass back to Nick.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex, for that overview of this year's Road Ahead and the trends and opportunities and events that we think will impact charities and volunteering this year. And obviously for us all to kind of hang on to that final thought about not losing hope. As a reminder, if listening to Alex has kind of raised any kind of questions, please feel free to submit these to us via the Q&A function. At our Road Ahead events, it's always good to hear some reflections and responses to what we're predicting from others within the sector. So I'm now pleased to invite the first of our two guest speakers, who is Charlotte Hill, the CEO of the Felix Project, which is a London charity that is fighting hunger and food waste. So to offer your reflections on the road ahead, Charlotte, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick and Alex. And Alex, as you were saying, I was listening to all of that thinking, crikey, it's not for the faint-hearted, is it, this voluntary sector stuff? We have indeed just been through what feels like, you know, wave after wave of crisis already. And as you were talking through all of those different things, I was reflecting, it was like a microcosm of the Felix Project. And I'm sure lots of you listening were thinking exactly the same. You know, we just went through what we thought was an extraordinary time with the COVID crisis, where we had to respond to such significant levels of demand for our food that we just thought there was no way we can ever see this sort of peak and this demand again. And actually what we've seen in the cost of living crisis in the last kind of 6 months to a year is that demand is significantly higher now. And that is because of these increasing inequalities that you spoke to. If I think about our organisation, we are both an environmental organisation trying to prevent food waste, but also trying to address inequalities. So those big systemic points that you pointed to, Alex, at the beginning around climate change and inequality are both things that, regardless of crisis and current context, we are trying to address. And they are both being hugely exacerbated by the current context and the challenges we're seeing. We also, and it really chimes with me, are having such significant fatigue within not just our own organisation, but we support over 1,000 community partners with the food that we distribute. And those 1,000 community partners are all telling us, one, they need more food because the demand is so significantly great because of the challenges that their communities are facing. But also their costs are massively going up. They are struggling with volunteer numbers because volunteers have got other pulls on their time, whether they're carers or they're having to take on another job or whatever it is in the current crisis. Our own costs have gone up about 40% in the last year. You know, we run a fleet of 45 vehicles that drive food all around. We've got 4 great big depots with ginormous energy bills. We've got a kitchen, a commercial kitchen. So lots of the things you've described, you know, are exactly what we are seeing. And our financial year is actually our calendar year. So I'm now 25 days into my new budget, and already it's slightly, I think I've got my board meeting this afternoon, and you know, some of the plans we put in place for a budget that's 25 days old are already significantly changing. That's how quickly things feel like they're moving. I was really interested to reflect on the things around our employees and what we can offer around flexible working. I totally agree. So we effectively run a logistics business, and lots of our big corporate food supply partners who come in and see us often say, oh, it's amazing, there's a real magic you have. Even though you're running a really professional operation, there's something around having volunteers involved and the way you work that makes it feel really special, and that means you can attract and retain people in ways that we can't. But I would say, you know, 85% of my colleagues are effectively key workers for whom I can't offer flexibility. 363 days a year, we are committed to getting food out to the most vulnerable people in society. And there is no option to work from home for those colleagues in the depot. They need to be driving that forklift truck. They need to be in those vans getting that food out. So whilst there is some flexibility, I don't think that flexibility is completely across the board. And that offers some real challenges, because for some of my colleagues who are fundraising or in the finance team, maybe we can offer that, but we can't for the frontline workers who are needed to deliver this, where the demand is so significantly high. I definitely would say one of the big reflections for me and how we've been managing with lots of these challenges and looking forward is collaboration. So I just came from breakfast with Lindsay, who's the chief exec at Magic Breakfast this morning. You know, we do an awful lot about getting food out to schools who are increasingly, primary schools are desperately telling us kids are coming to school with empty packed lunch boxes without being able to afford their school meals, knowing they've had no breakfast, knowing that they're going to go home to no food and in the house. So we can't meet that demand. Magic Breakfast can't meet that demand. So how can we work alongside other voluntary sector organisations to say collectively, how can we make sure we're looking really cleverly about how you're using your resource, we're using our resource, and collectively we try and meet the demand, not individually. And that also is a cross-sector piece. And this is another big reflection I would have. Yes, this is a reflection on the state of the voluntary sector, but most of what we do, we couldn't do without cross-sector collaboration. More and more, we're working with colleagues in the business sector. I'm actually sitting in Barclays on the 30th floor at Barclays talking to you, because we're more and more, looking at what brilliant stuff they're doing with Trussell Trust around financial literacy. Well, actually, there's lots we can offer, that they're doing with Trussell. So it's collaboration within the voluntary sector, but also within a great business community, also with our local authority colleagues. They're facing very, very similar challenges in local authorities around their budgets, around their demand, around what they're trying to do. So more and more, we're looking, how do we join forces and collaborate with our colleagues in business, but also in the public sector in new, innovative ways. And that's another, I guess, reflection is, we're all blooming having to innovate endlessly, endless innovation, but we're really good at it. We're really good at it as a sector. Again, colleagues from lots of different sectors come in and look at what we do and they're like, wow, one, you're nimble and you're agile, but you are hugely innovative in everything you do. So let's really cling on to that. We're good at this. We're good at collaborating. We're good at innovating. We're good at bringing people together. We're good at finding solutions. We're also good at supporting each other. And that would be my other reflection: mental health, fatigue. Let's all support each other in this. Let's be really clear about how we as voluntary sector colleagues can support each other and collaborate. But let's also be real about what we need from our sector, all of our sector bodies. NCVO, a brilliant example. There's lots of things that you guys are doing that mean I should stop doing it, because actually you are great at doing some of this, whether it's influencing, whether it's pulling together stats and facts and figures or doing research. Let's be really clear about what we have to stop doing because our resources are less, and what we can be pushing our sector bodies to do more, whether that is around bringing us together, whether that is around bringing our voice together, whether that is about research or work that can be done once rather than hundreds and hundreds of times by lots of different parts of the voluntary sector. So there's lots, even though it's exhausting and there's a huge amount to do and the demand is going up and funding is more scarce and harder to find and people are exhausted. Do you know what? I was just reflecting over Christmas. It's our busiest time at Felix. There is so much surplus food. It's kind of horrendous around Christmas and there's so much need. But in the middle, come together these incredible volunteers. We have 4,000 volunteers coming together to help us rescue as much food as possible and get it out there. We have amazing business partners helping us do it, brilliant public sector partners, incredible colleagues, literally, propping each other up, having to work all the time. So let's focus on the fact, yes, I can totally see in this report, and thank you so much NCVO for pulling it together. I can totally see there's a lot of challenge, but there's always opportunity for us to do more together, for us to innovate more, for us to support each other even better, and for us to think about new and different ways of working across sectors. So those are a few of my reflections. There's so much more I could go into on that, but I'm conscious that we're short on time. So yeah, lots to unpick. Thank you, NCVO.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Charlotte. That was great to hear your thoughts. Sorry. So we can now move on to our second guest speaker, who is Zoe Amar, the co-author of the Charitable Digital Code of Practice and the founder of Zoe Amar Digital, a social enterprise and digital agency who helps charities and other non-profits lead digital change more effectively. So for the next 5 minutes, Zoe, it's over to you to offer your reflections on the road ahead 2023.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And firstly, congratulations to NCVO and the team on an incredibly insightful Road Ahead report. So I'm going to talk about 3 things which jumped out at me from the report, which I think are especially relevant for how charities use digital. And I'm also going to give you some ideas which you can take back to your charities to put into practice. So the first thing that will have stood out from the report for many of us is the huge and worrying impact of the cost of living on the sector. And in particular, it was really concerning to read in the report that donations are declining as donors make these increasingly difficult choices. So how can digital help here? The number one thing I've seen charities do in this situation, whether they're large or small, is to talk to their donors. So simply conducting a small number of interviews, even if it's just with 5 to 10 people, will help your charity understand what donors think of your digital channels, whether they find them engaging or not, what other charities or causes they might be following on social media or via their newsletters. And that's something you can easily do yourself, whatever size of charity you are, with minimal budget. And it's really quick and really easy to do. And that will give you the insight and evidence into what you can do to improve your charity's digital channels so that you can then meet your donors' needs and help you engage them and fundraise more effectively online. The second thing that jumped out at me from the report is how remote working is becoming more embedded in the sector. And we heard about that from Alex earlier. That's really positive, and I agree it's an area that the voluntary sector should be leading the way on. So what can your charity do to lead the way in this area? One thing I'm getting asked about a lot at the moment is what is the right balance of days in the office versus working from home? And this leads me to ask whether tracking our time in the office versus being at our desks at home is the right metric of success. When asking this question, are we getting bogged down in the logistics of hybrid working? So one thing you can do in your charity is to define the outcomes you want to see as a result of flexible working and work backwards from those, because that will help guide the decisions you need to make about what weekly working patterns could look like now. So those outcomes might involve improved staff retention, being able to recruit from an even wider geographical area, staff feeling more of a sense of autonomy, and everyone feeling included. And we heard in the report of the really important nature of how we must keep building on the progress we've made as a sector in EDI. We all do our best work when we feel that we belong. What practical changes can we make to hybrid working so that we are reinforcing that vital sense of belonging with our staff and volunteers? That's a big question. So we might just start with one challenge, such as how do you make your meetings more inclusive? How can you ensure that everyone leaves your meetings feeling that they have been seen and heard? Thirdly and finally, I want to talk about where the report indicates the wider digital landscape is going and what that means for charities. The increased burden of compliance of everything from the online safety bill to the new Charity Commission's draft social media guidance means that charities are going to have to get up to speed with this new landscape really quickly. And that is a challenge in itself, because as we saw in the latest Charity Digital Skills report, which I co-author, many charities are still developing foundational digital skills, such as how do we do more with our data and how do we fundraise effectively online? So what can your charity do to get up to speed quickly? Well, you can look at where you can get some pro bono support, and that could start with following the excellent guidance that comes out of NCVO, and also asking if your auditors or your law firm, if you have one, can brief you on what you need to know about how to manage risk in the new ever-shifting digital landscape. So we've talked about how digital can help with the cost of living. We've talked about where you can improve remote working and also what you can do to get up to speed with what your charity can and can't do on digital and how that picture is getting even more complex. NCVO's report shows that there are challenges ahead for charities, but I agree with the message of hope that we've been hearing throughout today's session. If we continue to collaborate and build on the amazing flair for innovation and creativity that Charlotte mentioned, that we saw from charities of all sizes during the pandemic, we will be able to rise to the challenge of whatever the future holds. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Zoe, and to Charlotte for your reflections and responses to the Road Ahead 2023. But now, having listened to what we anticipate the road ahead for charities and volunteers looks like this year, it's over to you to put any questions that you have to our speakers today. So to Alex, to Charlotte, and to Zoe, who will be joined by two colleagues from NCVO's policy team, Sam and Chris. If you do have questions, please submit them via the Q&A function in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 15 minutes that we have for this section. So Charlotte, if I can maybe kind of start off with a kind of question for you, and I think kind of Alex kind of touched on that the sector could maybe kind of offer for flexible working to kind of compete with the public or the private sector pay, and Zoe kind of touched on hybrid working, but then you kind of reflected that in your organisation you do have kind of key workers as well as like back office kind of staff. So the kind of questions that kind of has come in is, do you think that flexible working can lead to resentments between teams for those who can work from home and those who can't, and how do you kind of manage that?
Yeah, of course it can. It's really, really tricky, particularly also for those people who then aren't on the front line to remain connected. So I think there's challenges both ways and resentment both ways. But, you know, at the moment, if you were to go into one of my depots, the first thing you would say is, it's blooming freezing. So, you know, for my workers, it's not just a lack of flexibility, but they're also working in sometimes really tough conditions. You know, there's all sorts of different kind of differences, not just around the flexibility, but all sorts of different things. And it can make things really tricky. So yes, I do agree. I think there's some real things around how you don't have a kind of a divided workforce. And in COVID, we really struggled with it because, of course, some of our colleagues were forced to work from home and other colleagues were having to be in the depot all the time. And the challenge and the stress on both were significant, but very different. So I think there's more we've been trying to do around how do we make sure we bring colleagues together wherever possible. We also really encourage our colleagues who do desk-based jobs to be in the depots, to do shifts. You know, I go out in a van or I work on the depot floor, you know, at least twice a month, just so I really still remember and understand it's important to do, and the different challenges there are across the different things, and just different ways of bringing colleagues together, making sure you do have different ways you communicate with different people, but different ways you bring those different teams together. So there's lots of different things we're trying, but honestly, anyone who's got this nailed, please tell me, because we still really struggle with it. We're still really trying to figure out how we make sure we don't have that kind of division or resentment or two-tier, you know, workforce. So if anyone's got any great tips on it, please let me know.
Yeah, I think absolutely kind of an opportunity, as you've kind of said, that the kind of sector is so innovative, and if there is a chance for us to kind of come together and share what that kind of best practice looks like, that would be a great opportunity. So for the next question, Alex, I might kind of come over to you. So we have been nurturing from kind of one crisis to another, and so this kind of question is around do these kind of themes that we've kind of got in this year's Road Ahead seems like they could cause organisations to be very internal facing, and what are some of the thoughts on how we can move forward in the sector in partnership to address these themes, but also looking forward and not just like immediately firefighting day to day with these new things that emerge?
Thanks, Nick. I think it's a really good question. So some of the things that we've put in this year's Road Ahead publication, they are quite internally focused in a sense, because we know that the people who are often coming to us are very busy chief executives and people running organizations and kind of trustees. And so we've tried to be really focused in this year's publication on the kind of really pressing things that they might not have all the headspace to be thinking about, but actually we can help and support some of that kind of thinking as well. So in a narrower publication, it's focused often on the things that leaders and kind of trustees need to be thinking about. That said, there are loads of fantastic things that are happening all across the sector that are future focused, that are thinking about how we should change things that should be different. So a couple of examples. Our collaborative project on the vision of volunteering has set out a 10-year vision for how we think volunteering needs to change to be brilliant for everyone, and for anyone who wants to volunteer to have a brilliant experience. That's a hugely ambitious kind of project. We hear all the time campaigners, whether that's kind of charity campaigners or informal groups, winning and changing laws and policies and freedoms that didn't exist before. Kirsty McNeil has the most incredible ongoing Twitter thread that documents all the victories that campaigners across the sector are winning every single week. It's incredible to see that. And as both Charlotte and Zoe have said, we've seen this period of incredible innovation. We've been able to adapt our organizations overnight, not just to run virtually, for example, but also to meet the changing needs of the people and the communities that we see around us. So I think we are always somehow outward looking because we're continually looking at our purpose and how do we deliver it, and the communities that need us, but also their aspirations and their hopes that we're also responding to. So whilst we're talking a lot today about the kind of internal things that we think charities should be thinking about, we know that in thinking about that, it's about the delivery of their purpose as an organization. And these things help do that outward looking stuff as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. So Sam, I might going to come to you next. In Alex's kind of overview on the ongoing impact of the cost of living, he spoke about maybe the need for organisations to considering kind of changing their structures, merging, or perhaps in the worst case scenario, even kind of closing. So we've had a question that's going to come in that in the current climate, do you think that economies of scale would be a benefit for a small charity considering a merger with a larger similar charity? And are you aware of kind of any advice that's out there to support them to reach those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, for brevity's sake, the road ahead pieces on our website and in Alex's talk today kind of highlighted some ends of the spectrum in terms of options that are open to charities. But I will make a shameless plug here for NCVO's resources. We have a wide array of free resources and also a ton of stuff behind our member paywall, which is a bit of a misnomer because for organizations on the very small end, NCVO membership is free. But if you look at our website, we talk about all kinds of ways of working together, going back to what Charlotte was talking about with collaboration. So everything from kind of collaborating on individual projects and maybe just staffing those and kind of having a specific outcome, to sharing back office services, to campaigning together for specific change that your organizations have kind of a shared mission to achieve. And I think that always kind of connecting with peers, so collaboration on a one-to-one scale is incredibly important. I think the point that somebody made about internal facing, kind of going internally and firefighting is a really good one, and always having in the back of your mind that so many other organizations and leaders are facing these challenges is really important, and seeking help from each other and just sharing ideas is really, really helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to pivot over to your kind of colleague in the policy team, to Chris. And so Chris, kind of Alex spoke about kind of adapting to political change, and he spoke about kind of the recent polling that we've kind of been seeing in the press and media. So should we be shifting our resources from engaging with government to trying to influence the Labour manifesto? What would be your kind of thoughts around that?
I suppose the first thing to say is you always need to be engaging across different parties and working with people across political divides. And I think, I think the really difficult thing to say here is you probably need to be doing both of those things. As Alex said, we've got 2 years essentially of this government left, and a lot can happen. There's a lot in the legislative agenda that people need to be thinking about. But clearly, I think there is an opportunity to really influence the thinking of opposition parties, and actually the Conservatives as well, as we sort of move forward to the next election. So I imagine there will be a bit of a sort of subtle shift given the last few years. It's felt like, a stability in terms of there being a Conservative government, if not within those Conservative governments. So I think now definitely is the time to really be making sure you're expanding your influencing across parties and really seeking to get involved in those sort of discussions around manifestos.
Perfect. And if we could just stick with you for the next question, Chris, as well. So we kind of know kind of the Parliament kind of agenda is kind of very busy kind of in the next 12 months. But do you have any insight on a possible employment bill, what that might include?
Yeah, so the context for this is particularly a bill that's going through at the moment, which is the retained EU law bill, which is essentially the idea is taking off kind of like the remaining bits of EU law from UK law and converting it into new sort of UK statute. this is being done to an incredibly ambitious timescale. That's the diplomatic way of putting it, I think. And there's potentially sort of real challenges in amending things. So all sorts of swathes of law where EU law has been really important in the past are going to come sort of under scrutiny and be adapted. So employment law is one of the things. So we'll definitely, I think we'll have to see an employment bill to address those issues. I think it's very likely that that will be an attempt to sort of liberalize employment law, or effectively remove some of the rights that people currently have. So I think there's definitely a big I think charities will have to come at it certainly from the point of view of what matters to their beneficiaries in terms of things like job security and the rights they have at work. But also I think there's going to be an operational issue for charities, and the fact that the employment landscape could change quite significantly. I don't have any specific insight into what that employment bill might actually entail and the sort of the timings, but I think it's definitely one which I would suggest that charities need to keep an eye on, because it's on the way, and there will be changes, I think.
That's great, thank you. And I think we've probably got time for one more question, which I might just throw out to the panel, and you can maybe just physically put your hand up if you're willing to answer it. So commissioners now want more for their money and are trying to balance full cost recovery with a viable tender that can be challenging. Do you have any advice about how charities can compete with commercial companies in tendering for contracts that previously have been delivered by charities? Quite a big kind of question. Would anyone from our panel be happy to answer that?
I mean, I can give it a shot.
Go for it, thank you.
That's all right. I've tried to do this in the past, and obviously I have had not with my current organisation, but when I've been a previous chief exec, and I've had circumstances where I've won and circumstances where I've lost, and other circumstances where actually the way we've won is by collaborating with the private sector partner. So I think there's very different ways you can go about it, and it also depends very much on the tendering opportunity. But if there is a way to join forces, it's definitely worth looking at with the private sector partner. But if for whatever reason, whether it's that your values aren't aligned, or that it just isn't going to work, they're not interested in collaborating, it's about, I guess, trying to understand what you can compete on. Where are the areas where you bring strength and that they don't, and being really clear on that. And if you cannot compete on price, which is often, if you can't get your cost to where they can, I guess just be really clear about what are the other value adds. Where are you going to get more points in that scoring than they are? Because it's going to come down to the kind of scoring at the end of the day. So being really clear on where you can get your points up in the other areas. But yeah, I think it's always worth thinking about, if you're going to really struggle with being able to compete on some of that, then who could you collaborate with that means that you would be able to compete, and that might be a private sector partner.
Brilliant. So that does bring to a close our kind of Q&A session. Thank you for all the questions that you put to our panel. And I'm so sorry if we didn't get the opportunity to answer your questions that you submitted. But before we can cover the final few slides, we're going to launch a snap poll, which will appear any second now on your screen, asking 2 questions about how you found today's event. If you'd like to provide further feedback, I would love to hear your thoughts via our short survey monkey evaluation, which is being shared in the chat now. And it will also be included in the follow-up email. But in the final few minutes, there's just time to share with you the links to the 5 blogs that form the Road Ahead 2023, as well as offering analysis and insight that we've had today. At the bottom of each blog, you will find links to further tools, resources and support, from data protection guidance on the NCVO know-how site and guidance on campaigning and political activity produced by the Charity Commission, to advice from Charities Against Hate on how to manage your social media presence, or NCVO's guidance on financial management. Links to each of these blogs have been shared in the chat, but they're also on the NCVO website homepage and will be included in the post-event email. As a new addition to the Road Ahead 2023 as well, we've created a calendar of key dates and events that you may be interested in marking, publicising or taking part in, which include campaign weeks, sector events, memorial days and key points in the political calendar. Again, this has just been shared in the chat. I'm pleased to say that this isn't the end of the discussion on the Road Ahead 2023. And on the 1st of March, we'll be bringing NCVO members together at a workshop that we've called Act Today, Thrive Tomorrow, where we'll explore 3 of the key issues raised by this year's analysis around people, supporting staff, trustees and volunteers, politics and adapting to political change, and finally EDI and keeping up on the pace on equity, diversity and inclusion. If you're an NCVO member, we would love to see you there. And if you're not yet a member, come and join our community of 17,000 organisations. There's heaps of information on our website outlining our membership benefits, but better than that, our friendly membership team are only an email or a quicker phone call away to answer any questions that you may have. And finally, everything of what we've covered today has been very focused on the future. If you feel that you'd benefit from expert one-to-one support, our consultancy team are uniquely placed to give your organisation the consultancy expertise that you need in areas including evaluation and impact, governance and trusteeship, strategy and organisational development, and strategic volunteering. Again, the team would be more than happy to have a conversation around how they can meet the needs, realities and ambitions of your organisation, not just in 2023, but in the years ahead as well. So that's it. That concludes today's event and the launch of the Road Ahead 23. Only time will tell which of the issues discussed today will have the biggest impact on the voluntary sector. But no matter what hurdles come our way or what opportunities emerge over the course of the next 12 months, NCVO will be here to offer you any support or guidance that you may need every step of the way, and we'll work tirelessly to ensure that both the public and decision makers recognise the essential role that charities and volunteers play. So before we sign off, on behalf of my colleagues at NCVO, I'd like to give a special thanks to Zoe and Charlotte for their time and insight today. And the final thanks goes to you for spending the last hour with us. It's great to have had so many of you kind of joining us online, and I hope the past hour has been both interesting and thought-provoking. So we very much look forward to meeting you again in the future, and take care and have a great rest of the day.